I spent hours making a special dinner to celebrate my boyfriend's big internship, but he never showed up. When I finally found him, he was drunk at a bar laughing with his best friend, the girl he once loved, and now I don't know if I was ever really his choice. I live in a small college town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, not just in passing but deeply. The kids you grew up with in kindergarten are the same faces you see in middle school, high school, and eventually even college. There's very little room for reinvention. Your reputation, quirks, and childhood moments follow you everywhere. That's how it was for me, and that's how it was with Noah. I've known Noah practically my whole life. Since elementary school, he's been this constant figure in my world. Loud, funny, charming, athletic, the kind of boy everyone seemed to naturally gravitate toward. And me? I was the shy girl. The quiet one who sat in the corner, too nervous to raise my hand in class, too awkward to keep conversations going. I wasn't unpopular exactly, but I wasn't the kind of person anyone really noticed, especially not someone like Noah. Still, from the very beginning, I had this massive crush on him. It wasn't one of those little childhood crushes that fade after a few weeks. Mine stayed. Through elementary school, through middle school, into high school, and eventually into college. It was always there, like this secret part of me I carried everywhere. The thing is, for most of our lives, that love, if you can even call it that, was completely one-sided. Noah never liked me that way. In fact, he thought I was weird. And to be fair, I can't really blame him. Anytime he tried to talk to me when we were younger, I would freeze up, blush uncontrollably, and say the dumbest things, if I managed to say anything at all. Sometimes I would even avoid him altogether, because just the thought of interacting with him made my stomach twist in knots. From his perspective, I was just this quiet, awkward girl who could barely function around him. Of course, he wouldn't think of me romantically. What made it harder was Sally. Sally has been his best friend since forever, and she was also the girl he liked. He had a thing for her pretty much since elementary school, and it was obvious to anyone who paid attention. They had that easy, natural connection that comes from being best friends. The way they laughed together, whispered inside jokes, and always seemed to find each other in a crowded room. It was like watching something that I wanted but knew I couldn't have. How could I ever compete with someone like Sally, especially when Noah had eyes only for her? But of course, Sally didn't like Noah back. Not in that way, at least. Her heart belonged to John. And here's where it gets even messier. John was Noah and Sally's other best friend, completing their little trio. They were inseparable, always hanging out, always doing everything together. They had this bond that was untouchable, and I was always on the outside looking in. Noah liked Sally, Sally liked John, and John, well, he was oblivious half the time, but he cared about both of them deeply. It was like this unspoken love triangle, or maybe even a love square if you counted me standing awkwardly in the corner, invisible but still very much invested. Then came 8th grade, and everything changed. John's parents died in a tragic accident, and he had to move several states away to live with his grandparents. It was sudden, heartbreaking, and devastating for everyone, but especially for Noah and Sally. They lost not only their closest friend, but also this central part of their dynamic. For Noah, it was like losing his brother. For Sally, it was like losing someone who held her heart, even if she never said it out loud. After John left, things were never quite the same. Noah and Sally tried to keep in touch with him, calling, texting, even writing letters at first. But as high school went on, life got busier. Sports, clubs, exams, new friends, it all got in the way. The messages became less frequent, the calls fewer and farther between, until eventually, it was like John was just a memory they carried rather than a person they still actively knew. A little more about Noah because I think it really matters to the story of us. He didn't have an easy childhood, far from it. His parents died when he was still young, and with no extended family to take him in, he was placed in foster care. He bounced from one house to another, never really staying long enough to feel like he belonged. No one ever officially adopted him, and by the time he hit his teens, he had already learned how to build walls, how to survive on his own without expecting stability from anyone. At 16, he fought in court to become legally emancipated, and he actually won. He supported himself through sheer determination. That resilience, that ability to keep going when the world had given him nothing, it was one of the things I admired most about him. It made my crush on him feel almost inevitable, like I couldn't help but love someone who had endured so much and still stood strong. When he and Sally got their driver's licenses, their friendship with John found its rhythm again. They made weekly trips to see him, driving hours just to make sure the bond they had didn't fade completely. When John later chose to attend the same college as the rest of us, it felt like their trio had come full circle. They had their group back, their bond sealed even tighter with the nostalgia of childhood and the trials of adolescence. For me, it was complicated. I had always felt like an outsider in their little circle, the quiet kid who admired from afar. But something changed around that time. Sally began teasing Noah about me, reminding him of how I had liked him since we were little. Other mutual friends joined in, joking about how I'd never grown out of it. At first, I thought it was embarrassing, but in a strange way, it worked. For the first time, Noah actually saw me. And not just as the quiet, awkward girl who froze up whenever he spoke to me, but as someone he might want. Slowly, our conversations grew easier, his laughter around me became genuine, and eventually, we started dating. It felt like a dream I had been chasing for years finally became real. And he wasn't just tolerating me or humoring me. He genuinely seemed happy with me. For a while, it was perfect. But then came John's transfer. He'd earned a spot at AT20 University with a scholarship, an incredible opportunity that he couldn't pass up. It was bittersweet for all of us, but especially devastating for Sally. She and John had been together for less than a year, and suddenly they were forced into long distance. At first, they tried. Calls, texts, visits when possible, but slowly, the cracks began to show. John grew busier, buried under his new academic life, and Sally was left waiting. It broke her down piece by piece until, after months of struggling, she decided to end things. Watching her fall apart afterward was hard. She cried endlessly, nights blending into mornings where she was too exhausted to do anything but hurt. Noah couldn't stand it. He was always there, comforting her, reminding her she wasn't alone. And at first, I didn't mind. She was his best friend. If I were in her place, I would have wanted the same comfort from someone who loved me. So I stayed quiet, reminding myself not to be selfish. But as the weeks dragged on, it became harder. Sally wasn't bouncing back, and the comforting never seemed to stop. Late-night phone calls, hours spent with her when she was spiraling, Noah dropping everything for her. I wanted to be understanding, but part of me began to wonder when comforting turned into something more. Still, I said nothing. I kept telling myself she needed this time, that she would heal. And eventually, she did, at least on the surface. As summer came, she started smiling again, laughing with friends, even teasing the way she used to. But that's when I noticed something that unsettled me. It wasn't just Sally who was brighter, it was Noah too. The way he looked at her when she laughed, the way his shoulders relaxed when she was near, the pride in his eyes when she seemed okay again. It wasn't just about being her friend. There was something deeper there, something unspoken that I couldn't quite name, but I could feel it in my gut. Me and Noah hadn't gone out much, just the two of us lately, so I decided to plan something small but meaningful, a nice dinner together, just to reconnect without the noise of friends, classes, or the constant shadow of Sally's heartbreak. When I brought it up, Noah smiled, squeezed my hand, and agreed right away. For a moment, I was excited, almost giddy, thinking maybe this would be the start of us carving out more space for our relationship. But then, on the day of our dinner, he canceled. Last minute. His reason? Sally was crying again. It was her and John's 2-year anniversary, and the weight of it all came crashing back down on her. Noah told me she needed him, that he couldn't just ignore her pain when she was spiraling. He promised me we could make it up over the weekend, spending an entire day together instead. I swallowed the disappointment and told myself it was fine. After all, it wasn't a big fancy dinner, and it wasn't like we hadn't celebrated recently. Our own 2-year anniversary had been only a couple of weeks before. True to his word, Noah did make it up to me. He showed up with flowers and a thoughtful gift, and when we finally did spend that weekend together, he gave me his full attention. It wasn't perfect, but it mattered that he tried. In my heart, I told myself this was enough, that I could accept his role in Sally's healing because I trusted him. I didn't want to be the kind of girlfriend who was jealous of someone who was hurting. By the time we reached our 3rd year together, Sally had changed a lot. She was lighter, freer, no longer drowning in the weight of John's absence. She laughed again, really laughed, and the whole friend group noticed. It felt like she had finally broken through the fog she'd been living in, and honestly, we were all relieved. I think what helped her the most wasn't just time, it was Noah. The two of them started spending more time together, like they were rediscovering the rhythm of their old friendship. Noah had always been ambitious. Ever since I'd known him, his dream was to become a lawyer, and everything he did was a step toward that goal. When he got the internship at one of the top law firms, the same one he hoped to work at after law school, I was so proud of him. It felt like one of those milestones that deserved to be celebrated, not just because of his achievement, but because of how much he had endured to get here. His childhood, the instability of foster homes, the sheer determination it must have taken to fight for his own emancipation at 16, it all led up to this. And selfishly, I wanted to be a part of that moment. I wanted us to celebrate it together, to mark it as another chapter in our story. So I planned something small but meaningful. A quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. I spent hours in the kitchen, trying to make everything perfect. Cooking wasn't something I was amazing at, but I wanted it to feel special, like an intimate reward for his hard work. The table was set, candles ready, and I kept glancing at the clock, each tick of the second hand filling me with more anticipation. Our agreed time came and went. 30 minutes later, I started to get nervous. Maybe he got held up, maybe traffic. I texted him just to check, my chest tight as I waited for a response. A few minutes later, he replied he'd be home soon, but he was caught up with friends and professors who were congratulating him. I told myself it was fine. Of course they'd want to celebrate with him, but deep down, something in me sank. When an hour passed, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling anymore. The food was getting cold, and the candles had burned halfway down. I sat there, staring at the dishes I had worked on all afternoon, and suddenly, I felt ridiculous, like I had created this perfect little scene for someone who might not even walk through the door. Eventually, I gave up hope, sat down alone, and quietly ate a portion of the meal I had made. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I cleaned my plate slowly, every movement mechanical, my chest heavy with disappointment. But as more time passed, worry replaced disappointment. What if something had happened? I grabbed my jacket and decided to go look for him. I walked through the cool night air, stopping by a couple of bars where students and young professionals usually gathered. The second one I walked into, I found him. He was sitting at a table, surrounded by our mutual friends, a drink in hand, laughing so loudly that it carried across the room. For a moment, I froze in the doorway. Relief that he was safe quickly turned into something else entirely. My eyes stung, and before I even realized it, tears started streaming down my face. I wasn't angry that he wanted to celebrate with his friends. I could understand that. What hurt was that I wasn't included, that I hadn't even crossed his mind when he thought about who he wanted by his side in that moment. And then my eyes landed on Sally. She was sitting right next to him, leaning into him like the two of them were in their own private world. She laughed at everything he said, grabbed his arm every time she leaned forward, her gaze on him soft and love-struck, even if dulled by alcohol. There were other girls there too, so I couldn't claim it was just her, but it was the way she looked at him that made my stomach twist. I didn't approach them. I didn't want to make a scene, and honestly, I didn't trust myself not to break down right there in front of everyone. So I turned and walked out, swallowing sobs the whole way home. When I finally heard him come into our bedroom much later, my heart pounded so loudly, I could barely breathe. I had composed myself, wiped away the tears, and forced my face into something neutral. He stood in the doorway, looking almost guilty, almost hesitant, and I told him flatly that there were leftovers in the fridge. Then I turned over and pulled the blanket over myself. He stood there for a long time, the silence heavy, then walked over and sat at the edge of the bed. When he reached out to touch me, I flinched and moved away. The words came out sharper than I meant them to. Sleep on the couch. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but instead he stood quietly, grabbed a blanket, and left the room. I heard the clink of dishes in the kitchen as he reheated and ate the dinner I had so carefully prepared. Now I'm sitting here writing this with tears still drying on my face. I don't even know what I feel: anger, hurt, disappointment, maybe all of them tangled together. The one thing I do know is that I need space. I can't let this spiral into something that destroys me or my future. I start the new semester soon, and my grades and career are too important to risk over a man, even when I've loved for so long. So for now, I'm choosing silence. I'm choosing to cool down, to think clearly before saying or doing something I'll regret. Maybe in a few days I'll sit down with him and have the conversation we need to have. Maybe I'll find the courage to set boundaries I should have set a long time ago. Or maybe I'll finally see that this isn't the relationship I deserve, no matter how much I've invested in it. I don't know what comes next, but I do know this: I can't keep being the afterthought in my own relationship. And if that's all I'll ever be to him, then I need to find the strength to walk away.